Hi, it's Ileana. So today I'm going to be talking about remote viewing from the perspective of understanding the data that you're receiving. Okay, so for example, you're a tasker, right? You assigned certain set of numbers that either you randomly generated or custom created depending on what you want for your tasking. Tasking is when you create kind of a sheet with all the data information that you want for a remote viewer to remote view. The remote viewer will focus in on this particular item and describe in specific detail these things. You always want the tasking to represent specifics of something in as much, detail as you want them to look at it, for the remote viewer to look at something. And that's your tasking. That's your tasking sheet. And that could be very small or that could be more robust. If you're just looking for one item for a remote viewer to remote view, you just have one item. If you have several items, you make them into focuses. Focuses A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. And sometimes if you have too many things on there, it could be harder to focus on specifics for the remote viewer to get everything on your list because you have a lot of stuff. Then you have to be very specific in what you're asking for. So that's kind of number one thing from a tasker's perspective for remote viewing. The numbers, the letters, they correspond to what's in the target, to what's in the tasking sheet. That's how the basics of the tasking stuff works. Now, when you're doing remote viewing, you're tapping into those numbers, letters, you say them out loud, you look through them, you look at them, and you go to the signal of the target, and you start remote viewing. You're starting to get impressions of the gestalts, the idioms, the physical things in the target. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it round? Is it square? Is it man-made? Is it natural? Is it a house? Is it a boat? What is the scene? What is the environment? What is the year? What is the time? Is there a person here? Is there life here? Is there no life here? Is it a planet? Is it a dimension? What is it? And you start to bring those aspects back in and you write it on the sheet. And there's levels of remote viewing. This is the beginning level. This is step one, phase one, I guess. Phase two is basically fleshing out the details of the gestalts and the idioms. Phase two is, okay, I have my impressions. I wrote down natural, unnatural, man-made, human, non-human, extraterrestrial, whatever that is, right? Then you take those concepts and you bring it into phase two and you look at the more finite details. Well, who's the extraterrestrial? What was the man-made thing? What was the unman-made thing? You just add more detail to those characteristics. Man-made, not man-made. Who's the extraterrestrial? What do they look like? Where do they live? What planet do they come from? Etc., etc. Just bring in more finite details to the aspects of what was in phase one. And you add more, if there's more information around those topics, you add that in, you draw that in, you write that in, or you do it on a digital whiteboard or just on a whiteboard, whatever tools you're using, piece of paper, with a pen. And phase three is connecting the dots. How do these bits of information, how do these pieces of data align together? Like, what is the picture here? The macro and the micro, the broader picture and the smaller picture. How does things come together? Because you're still getting information, right? From phase two, you have that more finite detail. Then you take it to another page, phase three, and you keep fleshing it out. You keep getting more details. How does this come together? What is this stuff? What's it all about? The broader aspect of the picture and the more, closer aspect. The broader lens and the smaller lens. Because you keep getting more info and you're widening the scope a little bit more. More details are coming in. So phase 3 is just more details coming in, and more new information might come in about what you previously were getting in phase 2 or step 2. So you just keep trusting yourself. Always be clear of mind. Always be relaxed. Try to be in the best position to remote view where you're not so tired or you're not distracted or things are not getting in the way, And if you are getting signals, something in the signal doesn't feel right to you, does not feel right, or feels like it's distorted or disturbed, or something is off, then stop. Take a break. Take an AI break. So that signal breaks so that you are not getting information which is not accurate. If you get that feeling or something isn't right, just take a break and then come back to it after a little bit to reconnect with the signal and keep doing the work. Phase 3 is about more detailed information, about things starting to make sense, starting to connect. There's some kind of a story. There's a story of what's going on in the signal, of everything that you've picked up on and you're putting together as the scene, what's going on here. And there could be more. Sometimes it's one item in the remote viewing target, and sometimes it's many items that are interconnected or somehow related. That's why you have your AOLs, analytical overlays, where you, in that section, in that category, if it's something related to the target, you could put it in there. It's all about, and some people do it, they have columns of, some people have columns and sections in their phase 1, 2, and 3, and 4, where they put stuff like AI, AOLs, sensations, emotions, stuff like that. That's very specific in sections and categories. Some people don't do it like that. It just really depends on which format of remote viewing you were trained in, because there's different styles of remote viewing as well. So, and then you have your phase 4, where the big picture is supposed to come together. It's that space of, do things somewhat make sense to me? So are things flowing in a specific direction? What is the fleshed out story? What is the connection? You're not being asked to analyze anything or overanalyze anything. In remote viewing, whatever data you get is what you get. That's what you put down on the paper, on the digital whiteboard, on whatever you're sketching on, drawing on, writing on. You write it down, you draw it out. You don't change things. Unless you made a spelling mistake, then you can change that. Or, if you've drawn the proportions wrong on somebody's face, you can change that, but you can't change the data itself. You're not supposed to analyze the data. You're not supposed to change it. You're not supposed to wander about, what's this, what's that. You can ask questions if you need more information on something, on a subject. Show me in better focus what is in this specific target. You can direct yourself to ask that question. Show me what is the most important thing in this focus A or in this target, to focus in on finding what's important. You can do that at any point, like in phase 1, 2, 3. Phase 1 is more like, getting things down, tapping into the signal, getting the basics. Phase 2 is building on those basics. Phase 3 is fleshing out something that's going on, the picture. Phase 4 is the story. Phase 4 is the story itself. So you want to connect the dots. You're kind of connecting the dots, but without analyzing anything or over analyzing or wondering what this is. You're just putting together the puzzle pieces and kind of seeing if that makes sense to you or not a little bit. Like, does that feel right? Does that feel wrong? And am I still on target? You know, you can ask those simple questions, but not overanalyze them, and trust the response you're getting in phase 4. And you lay out phase 4 with your drawings, your writing, and see how that connects in that phase 4. And again, if you need more information on the target, basically the target itself or the focus, because sometimes a target can have more than one aspect to it, it could have focuses, then you can ask that, what is the most important thing in this target or this focus to focus on? And show me what that is. You could write that down with a question mark, and you'll get a response. Your mind, because it goes to the signal in the target, your mind will show you what that important thing is. It'll lead you to it in the target itself. It'll try to find it in the signal of those numbers and in the scene of wherever you are. And sometimes our mind can go off target too. That can happen in remote viewing. There's something going on and we can go off target. We're not always right with targets. The more we practice, the more we do from phase 1 to phase 4, the better we get at the targets and the more we understand what's going on in the scene of the signal. Another aspect to remote viewing, okay, after you finished your remote viewing, you know, all 4 phases, then you have to collate the data into a report format. There's that aspect as well to it. You line up phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. You know, you have your paper session written, all your things that are in the writing aspect. Then you have your images with it in the diagrams. Some people do it like that. I still draw sometimes and write sometimes by hand if I'm getting something super impressional, that's super important, but usually I go to the digital whiteboard. And whatever I'm seeing with my mind, the impressions of the information, the data, I'm typing it out in a document as I'm seeing it. And I'm also rendering and modeling the images of exactly what I'm seeing in the target signal. And I call it the paper session where the writing aspects go, and the whiteboard session where the images of the impressions of what I'm getting go, with more write-ups to describe what that is, to flesh out the story. And then I do a target summary description to sum up everything that is the target, the most important points connected to the target and how. I'm not overanalyzing it. I'm just using the data to collate the target summary description of highlighting the most important things and how they connect based on the data of what I got from the target that's already in the report. And that's how I finish my report. And then I turn it in to the remote viewer. My targets with those numbers are usually blind. I don't know what the target is. Working it blind. Sometimes I have targets with numbers where I get a lot of impressions of what the item is, and then I put AOL deductions. If I've guessed what the target is, I put it in an AOL deduction. I have a section for that. And again, people's reports can look different to what it is, how it works. because everybody has their own unique individual style, and that's fine as long as it's in the format that's basic science, understood how remote viewing works. Your paper session, your whiteboard, or your drawing aspects with diagrams and descriptions, and then your summary of the target description. As long as it's all aligned in a format that's understood and readable, it counts as remote viewing reports. Then on the other side of that, when you turn in your report to whoever tasked you the remote viewing, their job is to analyze the data and see how it really fits into what you got from your target, what you turned into them. They're the ones that are doing, because they're the taskers, they're doing the data analysis of how the feedback in the tasking, how that fits with the data that you brought in. Does it fit together? Does it come together? Does it make sense? And if it does, then you're on target. If the data doesn't really fit, it could be off target, somewhat on target. There could be variables of something going on. It's good if somebody is remote viewing the same target with several people. If several people are remote viewing the same target is what I'm basically trying to say. And if their data is similar to what you remote viewed, then there's a consensus that you're on target because other people's data is similar to yours. It's making sense. It's making some sense here. If you're only working with one person that's doing the remote viewing for your tasking target, and they come back with information that is non-verifiable, not enough data there to make a consensus, it's difficult to make a decision on how accurate the target is, or even if it's really what's happening in the target. Sometimes something can happen where several remote viewers are doing the same target for you as the tasker, right? And they come back with different data sets. And then it's sometimes it's just not enough data verification to make a conclusive decision on something. Sometimes it's hard to say conclusively what's going on. And then you just, you have to be careful with that kind of stuff, not to be biased. And sometimes things happen where there's confusion with target results, where the remote viewer comes back with data and the tasker / analyzer, they are set on their own thing. This is how it is and it can't be any other way. That's fine, that's their right, but sometimes that can also be biased. When several remote viewers' points of views, the data shows one thing, the tasker decides something else, that's fine. That can happen too. There's biases in analyzing data and targets. Sometimes information is somewhat inconclusive to make a finite point of it, whether it's on target or off target specifically. Sometimes it can be somewhat on target, where several data points fit in some part of the target and where other data points are non-conclusive and somewhat confusing. I try to not be biased about data. If something comes back from 2 remote viewers that I task something to and the data kind of fits, then I see something, I see a pattern. I don't immediately, and if something doesn't kind of fit, I don't immediately discard it as off target. I look at all the data points with a non-biased perspective. I try to remove my own thoughts, feelings, what I think about the information, and be non-biased. Because if you are biased somewhat, and you want to believe something, and you believe it, then that's what you believe, and that's what you put out. And it might not be completely accurate, or there might be misunderstanding. in how the data is being interpreted and how it's being labeled as such one thing when it's not. You have to be very careful about that. Or releasing remote viewing data too soon when you need to be careful. Sometimes data is very sensitive, and what you release out there to the public, that data can have information in it that's too sensitive, and then something comes back to you as a consequence. And that can happen too. And then you just pull back the data, you remove it. If it shouldn't be out in public, it shouldn't be out in public. Sometimes it's hard to know what to put out in public and what not to. What's too sensitive, not sensitive. You learn that with time, what remote viewing results you can make public and which ones you can't. And sometimes we all make mistakes and release something we shouldn't, then we remove it, apologize, move on. Stuff happens. It's not a perfect science. It's a form of ESP, clairvoyance. Some aspect of that exists in remote viewing because you're using your mind and your psi abilities to tap into signals of targets. So I wouldn't classify it as a psychic thing that psychics do. Remote viewing is controlled. It is with the controlled mind. You're not just supposed to psychically go and tap into anything that you see and say, yes, that's it. No, remote viewing is controlled. You're not using your psychic abilities to go here, 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 this, yes, 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 yes. You don't know if it's a yes. Psychic readings are more like you go and, aha, I think I know this. This is what I'm getting. Perfect. That's more of a psychic reading. Remote viewing is focused mind, precise data. You're not wondering what it is. You're not making up in your mind a scenario of what the data is or what it means or how it fits. No. Whatever data you're getting, that is what you get. That's it. Yes, you're using some portion of your psychic ability to tap into it, but you're not doing psychic readings. That's different. Remote viewing is more strict. It's controlled. It has an aspect of science to it and the rules and protocols that you follow in that. So it is different than psychic readings. So again, for me, I know the perspectives of now being a remote viewer and a tasker. So I can assign taskings for other remote viewers to do sessions, and I can still remote view and do sessions for other people or just sessions for myself or whatever I want. I also experiment with remote viewing. I do blind remote viewing. I do unblind remote viewing taskings. I do exotic experiments with remote viewing. I do a lot of different things. So I can be strict by the book remote viewer, or I could be outside the box remote viewer, whatever is warranted for whatever is needed, basically. So I can work with the numbers, can give me target numbers. I can work with those totally blind. I can work with unblind target taskings. Just don't give me too much information with the unblind targets, please, because that ends up front loading and back loading a person with information they don't need to have. Even in unblind targets, don't give specifics. You might just give one word or something relating to the word, to the target, but don't give it all away. Even in unblind targets, no. Don't give the whole story. You just give one word, one thought, something, and that's it. And the remote viewer is supposed to unblind target. They're supposed to go and get the information for you. Don't tell them much about anything at all. You're not supposed to. Remote viewing is as little data as possible or no data at all in blind targets. That's how it works. That's another aspect of remote viewing. Sometimes I do remote viewing where people will have questions that they want to ask in a remote viewing session, but I should not know what the questions are ahead of time, because then I would be preloaded with information about something, front loaded, back loaded, and I don't need to be. So that's another type of remote viewing based on questions with private sessions. So that's kind of the remote viewing process of how I can best describe it and what I know how it works. And again, being very careful about the data and data interpretation. That's why I thought it was a good experience to do remote viewing first, then learn tasking and assigning targets. And being a good data analyst and interpreting the information in the data, how it fits, how it doesn't fit, and being non-biased, that will save you a lot of trouble. And sometimes people can put out stuff that's misunderstood. They're not sure how it fits into what they're actually doing of tasking or what they're asking for. And they have a bunch of characters and people that they've labeled as one thing where it's totally something else. That can happen too sometimes. Again, we try our best not to interject personal bias into reality of remote viewing, but sometimes it happens. It's data, it's information, it's interpreting things. What is the real reality here and what isn't? How does it fit? Unless you have a whole range of data from multiple remote viewers with similar information, it's hard to peg or put together something as a one consensus. It's difficult, and you have to use your best ability of interpreting the data to make a final decision on what it is or what it isn't, or where it fits or where it doesn't. Because sometimes you have characters and players that end up in your remote viewing that are totally non-related to what your target is, or somewhat related to the target if you've also had that person remote view your target and they ended up in your target. That can happen too, and then another remote viewer is reporting on that person because they're picking them up. They ended up in the target, in the scene where they're not supposed to even be. And then other people end up in that scene as well because that person is communicating with other people. That can happen too, and it seems to have happened sometimes. Remote viewing is so broad-based. You can pick up on anything and everything and bring it in as data, and then the tasker has to figure it out how it fits or doesn't. Many weird things can happen in this field of research, in this field as a tool to bring back information. It could be totally normal, or it could be sometimes weird in what comes back, the unexpected. Not what you thought you would get, but you got something informationally you didn't even expect to get, and that's okay. It's your job to figure out how it works and fits, whether it can be published or not, using critical thinking to do our job right. So that's remote viewing from what I know, my knowledge and understanding. Thank you so much.